In this episode of the Casting Shadows podcast, I am joined, believe it or not, hold on to your hats, buckle up, I am joined by the formerly prolific, but still iconic, Jason Connerley of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. As longtime listeners of his show and mine might be aware, Jason and I both have a great fondness for espionage-related RPGs, and so it should come as no surprise that we're both listeners of the relatively new podcast called Go Bag, which focuses specifically on covert action in role-playing games. Its first season covered a survey of different approaches to espionage games from the very earliest to some later examples, and its current second season is deeply exploring Delta Green in this context. Its hosts are Sean P. Kelly, formerly of Gaming and BS, and Harrigan of Harrigan's Hearth. So, with this connection and that inspiration, Jason and I got together to talk about other games which predate Delta Green and lay similar types of groundwork that answer similar questions or deal with similar problems, and perhaps by exploring them, your appreciation of Delta Green might be enhanced, or whatever issues or problems you might be uncovering as you get into Delta Green or other, let's say, dangerous games might be helped by this kind of investigation. So, without further ado, let's leap to that conversation and see what resources we uncovered. All right. Well, how you doing, Jason?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Anthony?
Not too bad, although in my life there's this huge Nerds RPG Variety Cast shaped hole.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
It's not your fault.
The real world is just, maybe someday, maybe when I retire, I can get back to it. Who knows?
But today, both of us are, I guess, regular listeners to Sean and Harrigan's Go Bag. And the other day we were talking on the Discord in relation to that espionage-related podcast. We were talking about other sources of inspiration for a very cool role-playing game that is the feature of their second season, and that's Delta Green. Right. So our conversation, I guess, got a little out of hand and has now blossomed into this episode.
Yeah, they I think they're worried a little bit about mission creep for their second season, which is understandable. but let me read you something, Anthony. Let me read you something. Yeah. There's a paragraph out of a role-playing game. You will become a government agent charged with the duty of disposing of the greatest unnatural threats to the people and to the economy of the United States and Canada. You will work under the knowledge that you are funded by an agency so secret, even the highest officials do not know of its existence. Welcome to an elite band of people who wander the dark streets of the night, ever searching for the horrors that should not exist in the modern age. You're an agent stalking the night fantastic. And in the sample group we have for this game, in this agency recruit, because of a massacre that happened a decade prior, that they're having to recruit common people off the street. So our focal character in the book, who they use to explain the character generation, things like that, is a science fiction writer who, goes to science fiction conventions for fun, profit, free dinners. So his involvement in the agency started when he was at a convention in Detroit. He saved a number of lives as he crushed the head of a werewolf with a silver-plated Hugo Award for best short story.
No.
To his amazement, he discovered that the supernatural was real, and the federal agency called Bureau 13 was out to liquidate the more malign aspects. For more than a century, the secret group had been funded as a necessary arm of the government. Robert was given the choice of joining the agency, keeping quiet, or being faced with the wrath of the IRS. Realizing he would never survive a tax audit, he joined without a moment's hesitation. And the group of novice hunters that he's joined up with include a priest, a reporter, a paramedic, an artist, a gunsmith, and a gun runner. This being the 80s, the gun runner, of course, is Irish. But when you think about that, this could very easily be a Delta Green group. And everything I said, if you squint, could be Delta Green to some degree.
Yeah, you can kind of see through lines, like the kind of random assortment of people who are caught up in the events like you'd get in Call of Cthulhu, but the government involvement is definitely more distinct.
Yeah, that was 1983. This is from 1983.
Stalking the Night Fantastic.
Yep.
Which later becomes Bureau 13, right? And
Correct.
This was published by Tritech.
Yes, Tritech Games. Yeah.
All right, so this is, I guess, our starting point in time for things which kind of get caught up in the same idea of player characters as investigators of the supernatural and the organizing principle that helps you as a group play through that experience. So I guess we could start really by looking at why having an organization, which is one of the key points of what makes Delta Green, what makes this game, right? Why having an organization for the players is important. Right? What happens if we don't have it?
Right. Well, it becomes a lot harder to go from adventure to adventure to adventure if you're not funded. If you have everyday jobs, you have to leave,
right.
Which does get incorporated in this game a little bit in Delta Green, definitely, where you get pulled. So that is an issue, but not everybody can be like it can't be like Supernatural, where you just have your fake identities and you go scene to scene and you use the money you get at each investigation. You get that illegal money and you use that to fund your mission.
Although that has a connection to Delta Green also, I think, with it. Yeah. But because that's another issue, right? Is how present will this organization be in your life? Are they assigning missions? Or is it more of a patron / benefactor, who has some reason, nefarious or, otherwise, for providing the funds for you, the expert, to go out and do what it is that you do? Do you have free will? Are you directed? Is there support? How much support? Can you gain some, material, or is it only funding? Are there other assets or people to meet in the places where you go? All these questions.
It's a little. Well, I'd be jumping ahead, so I'll hold that thought till we talk about other media.
Right.
So let's look at this. So obviously all this begins with arguably at least the first commercially successful horror game, which is called Cthulhu.
Call of Cthulhu, right.
Which also has these kind of issues with why are we doing investigations and keep doing these investigations, right?
So I think anybody who played Call of Cthulhu, who then decided they wanted to play it long term, with the same group of investigators, and they wanted to explore maybe that descent from sanity toward insanity. They didn't want to make new characters every time they played a new published adventure or whatever. I think at a certain point, and with a system like BRP, that lethal point or that breaking point of sanity isn't too far along the path of your exploration of the game before you have to start replacing characters. And it's not like earlier games where you might just recruit a new character from among the henchmen or the followers. Right. And it may not be appropriate to recruit the waiter in the restaurant where the monster attacked every time, or it might start to seem a little thin as a justification. Right. I'll play the valet.
That's how you become the transporter. You just, they happen to be bald, have a British accent.
That's right. So I think pretty much every group that plays it long term and not just pulling it out on Halloween or whatever comes to face this. How do we keep this group together? How do we ensure that the secrets that have been uncovered can be passed on to the new investigators or whatever? And one of the things that they did was in 82, they put together a campaign that could be a campaign if you wanted, or not a campaign otherwise, which is Shadows of Yog-Sothoth. And in that first adventure in that campaign, there is the Hermetic Order of the Silver Twilight, which is kind of like a play on the Golden Dawn. And the investigators are a member, basically, for all intents and purposes, for this adventure. And this membership might continue, or this membership might end during the course of the campaign. And it might involve joining the organization, or you might already be members of the organization. But this kind of lays out there the structure of what an organization might be like, and layers of mystery between you and the top people, and what kind of interests it might have as a group of people. And I suppose if we push a little harder, we could also think about the influence of RuneQuest on any Chaosium product, with brotherhoods and sisterhoods and different cults and organizations that system supports you generating. To answer that main question of why are we together, or why do we continue to do this? Why would some priest from a rural seaside community travel to the other side of the country to investigate a haunting or whatever? And how would they pay for it?
Yeah.
So that's between 81 and 83 where Bureau 13 lays this all out flat.
Right. Well,
supernatural is real.
And having, being part of the government, definitely simplifies things. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Now, in Bureau 13, it's a secret agency of the government. So, that you will be denied if you get arrested. They're not going to come bail you out, anything like that. All that kind of thing. But it talks in here about your funding and your salary, and it, goes into equipment. Bureau 13, some of the things Harrigan likes, if you listen to Go Bag, which I do recommend people do, some of the things they want to see in there are things like tradecraft, spy gadgets, things like that. Bureau 13 has all those things. One of the things the agents were issued are a special cigarette pack that has one real cigarette, and then the other cigarettes are just a variety of different special gadgets, everything from a tube of super glue to blow darts to, one is a plastic explosive, one's a detonator for the plastic explosive, just all kinds of stuff in there. There's all kinds of.
And really, this is why Gen X is so annoyed about everything, is that is the future we were promised.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and we didn't get it.
We did not.
It's actually amazing, just for a minor diversion here, and then we'll get back on the right track. But Harrigan talks about, there are certain characteristics he wants to see in a spy game, right, or an espionage game, and as much as he doesn't want to admit it, Bureau 13 actually hits just about all those things. It now, being 83, it doesn't really have meta currency. It does have a luck characteristic, though, where if you really need to make a roll, you can roll against your luck, and if you succeed, you get to add a couple percentiles to the skill roll you're making to give you a little bit better chance.
Right.
And then they also have a supernatural sensitivity attribute. So like basically the hair on the back of your neck might rise up if you're near the supernatural. So that it has supply depots, which because the Bureau was started by Abe Lincoln in that world, when you find a supply depot, you might have up-to-date equipment in there, or it might be as old as the 1870s, which is always great.
Right.
Um,
And this is the green boxes, and from
from
like the Delta
from Delta Green. But it actually covers a lot of that stuff. It's got the weapon stats that he wants. It even, Harrigan will appreciate, even talks about putting a full magazine in and topping off a round, so you have a round in the chamber and a full magazine, which he'll appreciate. But I'll back off because he doesn't want to hear that this game is what he's really looking for. But no, but as far as to get back right on track though, with the agency, it is interesting that the government agency thing is obviously the easy button, right? Because if you're federal agents,
Sure.
Even if, because in here you have the machine where you can make fake identities and fake credentials and things like that, so you can show up and be FBI agents, or you can be whatever to some degree. So
it's a real government agency with support from Congress at all, and it.
Yeah. So
they can't reveal to the public what the subject matter is.
But yeah, so that's the easy button. But a year after this, we find a different answer to this question with Chill.
With Chill and Save.
That's right.
Yes. All right. So Chill also has kind of a normal supernatural background, unlike Call of Cthulhu with its cosmic horror, which, although it included ghosts and werewolves and vampires for your enjoyment, it was never really about that kind of horror in its published material, at any rate. But Chill embraces kind of the classic monsters and gives you an organization, Save. So what is Save?
Well, it's the Eternal Society of the Silver Way. I'll let you pronounce it in Latin.
Sure. I've got your dead language hanging. Societas Argenti Viae Eternitata. Viewers at home, you can pronounce it yourselves.
That's right. But yeah, so which obviously, where did they get that from? The Silver Way. Yeah. But so Save is interesting because I'm trying to remember. It's been a long time since I've read Chill, and I don't have it right here in front of me. But I want to say this is a older organization, basically bankrolled by wealthy families from the old world, and then it came over to the new world. Is that right? I'm working off memory here, though, kind of faulty memory.
So this is Pacesetter in 1984. And there have been other editions since, but we're looking at, games that predate Delta Green, that encounter the same problem that you encounter with Delta Green, and these are the ways that they handle it, right? And that is the organization and resources and replacement characters. All of these things, rise up like monsters of the night to bite you. Right. So the Eternal Society of the Silver Way tracks down and, stamps out, eliminates evil. The monsters are evil, and we, their victims, are therefore good.
Yeah, which is interesting because when we step back a year, Bureau 13 actually mixes it up where it's not just about killing the supernatural, you're just keeping the public safe. So Bureau 13 does something very much like we would see in more modern games, where maybe you just need to relocate the supernatural somewhere else. Or I'm brain farting now. What's the current
Like catch and release?
Yeah, catch. Well, kind of. What's the what game am I thinking of? The Nordic horror game that everybody loves, Basin.
Oh, Basin.
Yeah, that's kind of that idea. So you're not necessarily trying to always eliminate the supernatural. Sometimes you're just trying to, and
right. And some of our some of our monsters are tragic. Like the werewolf. Through no fault of their own, they were attacked, and now this evil this curse has descended upon them, and yes,
right. So you've got that, and you've got a mixture of all those things, even Cthulhu type things in Bureau 13, where Pacesetter got and not Pacesetter, but Chill, kind of got the reputation for being the Hammer horror game mainly because of the art, the wonderful cover art. But it did lean into those more classic monsters, the universal monsters and monsters of myth and legend. And of course there was the Elvira module too, which was a bunch of mini adventures.
Yes. All right, and then a few years later, 88, we get Beyond the Supernatural.
With one of the best covers ever put on an RPG. The first edition, Beyond the Supernatural.
It reached out and grabbed me from the shelves in the gaming store.
Richard Corbin's cover there, it's amazing. It's this creature, they're like in an Egyptian, crypt or something, and this creature's just attacking the team, and they're flailing around. One's, firing an Uzi at it, but you can tell they're all going to die.
They're all going to die.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
All right, so Beyond the Supernatural uses the same kind of logic, and it would evolve over time to a firmer framing of the idea of the wealthy benefactor society kind of thing, like Save,
right,
or like Delta Green would turn out to be in a sense. Takes place in the second edition of Beyond the Supernatural, but that's outside the scope of our timeline. But in the first edition of Beyond the Supernatural, we do have the Laszlo Society presented as background material, and a variety of other organizations or individuals who might represent that kind of hook, or that organizational support, or interesting NPCs that you might meet during your investigations, which turn it from just this one time that happened to us in that place that was horrible into an ongoing series of horrible things happening to you all over the place. But Victor Laszlo being a famous, kind of like Kreskin, I guess, or a TV personality who explores the occult, and a debunker and that kind of thing in the tradition of Houdini, and open-minded, but focused on what is and isn't real.
Right. And it's important to note for Palladium fans, you've heard the name Laszlo in Rifts, and you've heard about ley lines and other Palladium games. All that starts with Beyond the Supernatural. This is the game where all that first appeared.
Right. And as a product, as a standalone horror gaming product, much like Call of Cthulhu, there is very directed game master advice about running horror, which is clearly based on running horror with a bunch of gamers. It's not, what is horror in literature, or what is horror in cinema? It's,
right,
you're playing a horror game and you'd kind of like it to be creepy. What can you expect from it? So I think, as a product where you could just get one title and look at, what is a horror game, or how can you run horror, Beyond the Supernatural, kind of punches above its weight.
Well, it even includes a victim character class in here. I had to do that. And then one of the scenarios, infamously, is a group of teeny boppers.
Yeah. Kids on bikes is here.
Yep.
Yeah, already.
Yep.
So that's all kind of cool. What it doesn't have is the wear and tear of horror on the psyche, right? Which is definitely a hallmark of Call of Cthulhu. It's definitely one of the, I think, the major draws to playing Delta Green is, all the nuance and style and bite that Pagan and later Arc Dream have added to that experience through Delta Green. But Beyond the Supernatural, that's just in the realm of role play,
right?
So you can still be that pulp character who's unaffected by their universe. They are shaping the universe, not being shaped by it. Or, you could play it as you wanted to.
Right. Well, and dropping back to Bureau 13 that does have rules for mental stability, and
Right.
once you lose it, but what it does say in there is the GM is recommended to use the system sparingly or optionally at best. They don't want you to, and I'm sure that's because of Call of Cthulhu. Well, this is the 92 edition I'm reading that from. So these rules were added later, but I'm sure that in 92, by the time they did this in 92, the idea of Call of Cthulhu and your characters going insane all the time, which, whether that's a fair stereotype or not, but that was out there. And so I'm sure that's one of the reasons they talk about use it sparingly in this game. But
that, and just its effects, depending on how long character creation makes for a particular group, how easy it is for them to come up with, if they're playing kind of in an in-character way, so who's my next character going to be if it's not just me with new stats, then, there are definite reasons to want to put on the brakes on anything that will remove the character from play.
Right.
You want it to be a part of play, but not, okay, we're going to invoke these mechanisms every single time something scary happens.
Yeah, and which is something Delta Green does very well. Arguably, I'm trying to think the timeline. Delta Green compared to I just lost it. We've talked about in the past. This one of my favorite implementations of the percentile system. What was the other horror game where I'll find it. We'll keep going. I'll circle back. But yeah, so Beyond the Supernatural has those kind of sanity rules in here too. Unfortunately, it also has the standard Palladium sanity system, which isn't ideal. But it does have horror factor for the creatures where you do have to roll against and all that.
Right. So that's a fear mechanism.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
to raise the challenge of a situation. Right. We've got to have to overcome the fear factor.
Yeah, but it's definitely, it's still pretty crude. Yeah.
Yeah. In this era, of course, we have the kind of random assignment of insanities. Although unfairly, Call of Cthulhu gets nailed for saying, in the early days, it started out with random assignment of insanities. So, you could face a ghostly apparition and walk out of there being afraid of bullets. Mm-hmm. But like so many things in Call of Cthulhu, that game required you to read it. So when it said things like "don't roll for everything," it kind of meant don't roll for everything. and when it said, if you can't think of a proper response of mental decline from the experience of the investigator, is here's this table and you could even roll on it. That's what it's actually saying. But but how that got presented by gamer conversation, has become the truth of the matter. No, they told you to roll for it. Insanities were random.
Right. So I remember the game I was thinking of, but it's actually post Delta Green, so we can't give it the credit for Delta Green getting the sanity, some of its good sanity. Well, it's post first edition Delta Green, but I'm thinking of Unknown Armies.
Unknown Armies. Sure,
and I wonder if Unknown Armies hasn't. I don't remember the same. I had the original edition of Delta Green, but I just don't remember what it did sanity wise, and if it did bonds or any of that, or if all that was second edition.
That's later on, and it's so this is
Unknown Armies sanity does predate the current sanity stuff in Delta Green,
right,
and possibly informs it, because Unknown Armies, which is post original Delta Green, definitely has one of the best sanity setups,
right. And of course, we're talking about inspirations, and we're talking about parallel development, and we're talking about other ways to handle these problems, or to give nuance to your play. And so, with each of these different games or points of inspiration, you've got gamers and game designers who enter into conversation with each other, and either through just the design of their games or directly. So I think Unknown Armies is hugely influential on where these types of games go next. So,
right. Well, and considering John Scott Tynes' work on Unknown Armies and Delta Green, I think
yes,
it's fair to say
that there was some
there may be
conversation
a connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he and Greg Stolzen.
Yeah.
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 So, yeah. So we've got up to 88. So a lot of these systems are considered to be old. And there is that knee-jerk response to, well, the old games, design is continually getting better through time, and it's all innovation all the time, which can be true. I don't find it to be often true, but our expectations for what a game system is or does, or where it gets involved in play, or how many steps it has definitely changed over time. So I want to add in a little tangent myself, kind of. We've been talking about investigators, we've been talking about organizations, and the types of horror. By 1990, we get a game called Nightlife, which long, long ago, there was an interview by the creator of Vampire, or the main force behind Vampire, Mark Reinhagen, who said, basically, he was quoting other people of the past when he said it, which is funny, which is creativity is being able to hide your sources. So, don't wear your inspirations too openly on your sleeve. And so if you look at Nightlife from 1990, you will basically see the World of Darkness almost complete, including a humanity score, right? So in it, you play the monsters. They set you up in a hardcore punk kind of New York. And, it's a percentile system, which I don't think was loved by anybody in that particular era when it came out. New designs were hungered after, and I think it puts a lot of math in the middle of exciting moments of, the loss of humanity or different stressors. So you're wrapped up in character play, and then, well, let's take a 5-minute pause while we take the average of this and round this up and round this down and that kind of stuff. So not suited to all users, we might say. But this notion of humanity, which goes on to inform the World of Darkness, which was, has a huge impact from 91 onward, really puts me in mind of things like the new way to look at sanity and the things that would inform what become bonds and your relationships, and things like the hardened vet approach to playing Delta Green, where you're completely inured to violence, and how that changes. It doesn't just give you an advantage of not having to make some kind of horror check or suffer sanity losses because of violence and gore, but also changes how you interact with the people around you. And we can see that kind of ripple in the pond, starting with a game like Nightlife in 1990, and then a much more significant splash, kind of like overwriting or replacing or removing Nightlife from history of the World of Darkness. And I think it would be hard to argue that particular circle of writers and designers and role-playing gamers didn't get exposed to the types of conversations that led to the creation of games like Nightlife and games like the World of Darkness. Something was cooking under the surface in that time period. And there's some connection in this era, I think, the real end of the Cold War, where we start to look at secret agents and those involved in covert action, not in the classy, the shirt is never wrinkled or stained James Bond,
right.
funny patriot protector of society. And the notion of the government is lying about this for your safety. This is eroding rapidly into the government is covering it up to protect themselves. And spies, or whatever you want to call them, are cold, ruthless killers. This is all,
Right. Well, it's funny because gaming's finally catching up to there. But when you look at other media, post Watergate, that was, that's your neo noir kind of comes out of all that, right? When we look at a lot of these films, a lot of these, a lot of the works came post Watergate. That's a huge theme in all kinds of things.
Being able to express it in game form as in a fun way,
right?
Lags behind the
the
easy mode of cinema.
Right. but it is kind of interesting. It took so long to kind of trickle down to that point. I guess in the 80s, we see your
trickle down to us anyway.
Right. Yeah. Trickle down there because although the games quickly latched on, to a lot of the themes we see, because in the 80s we have our Delta Force game and you have your games based on Red Dawn and things like that, and we have all those kind of games, but it takes a little while longer for that cynicism to really get deep in there. So yeah,
the fun kind of cynicism,
right?
All right, so now we're in 91, talking about Vampire. Vampire also, you can see the need for organizations and factions and divisions, and the idea that Delta Green isn't that kind of Bureau 13 kind of organization, or at least not for its whole history, right? It has periods where the program is canceled and becomes a private organization in the hands of its disavowed agents and that sort of stuff. And so that's an important kind of way to play this. All of this is predating the X-Files, of course, at this point.
Right. Yeah. Which is where that really hits the public hard. My wife and I have been rewatching the X-Files, and the idea of government mistrust, and there's episodes in there where a corporation tests basically germ warfare on a prison, right, on prisoners in a prison, and the government covers it up, and Mulder has to agree that we need to cover this up for the we can't tell people this threat out there because the panic will be worse than telling them. So even Mulder has to become complicit in this cover up. It's really eye opening watching those, rewatching those episodes today.
Yeah, important stuff.
Yeah.
So then, also in 91, we have, certainly tied in with that theme, we have Dark Conspiracy and Over the Edge.
Right.
And Over the Edge might not leap out as an inspiration for Delta Green right off the top, but I find the strange bedfellows nature of it. You all wash up in this situation, which you have to handle the seeds that are planted in the game toward less nailed down specificity about your character, but that you could interplay with some kind of placeholder characteristics. Like, I think maybe my guy knows some contacts, but I don't know who the contacts will be. Let's see who they are and play this kind of leeway in the identity of the character. They all plant seeds that I think inform conversations like, what is a bond? I want to have a bond with with my wife, or with I was raised by my uncle on the farm kind of thing. And that's pretty vague. And it's a conversation between you and the handler, who these characters are and what that relationship actually turns out to be, and how it suffers because of the the events of play in Delta Green. So I see a lot of that foundation design work or thinking about character happening in Over the Edge around that time, in that circle of people. What about Dark Conspiracy?
So Dark Conspiracy is interesting. I think the biggest thing that comes, it's kind of a little bit different game, than what we've been talking about. It's an alternate history. We're in an alternate world where things kind of stopped, and now where you're at is kind of this retro, where it's kind of kind of modern tech, but we have retro tech. So we want the cars to look like the 50s and all that. There's more advanced tech. There's some kind of alien / supernatural threat that the players don't really know what that is. You have points of light where the areas between the cities have kind of gotten dark and evil and dangerous. Demon ground is what it's called in the game.
Right.
NASA's no longer exploring space. Now if you're a NASA agent, you're investigating, phenomena on Earth, things like that. It's kind of interesting. I think though the biggest thing it brings to Delta Green is a Traveler / Twilight 2000. This is a GDW game, and it shares a ton of DNA with Twilight 2000 as far as the game mechanics go. But the career system, where you can roll up, you create your agent, and you build your, every couple years you build your history, just like in Cyberpunk or Traveler or any of these
That
games.
modular approach to character design.
Yeah, and it's got military careers built, military career paths, and law enforcement career paths, and construction career paths. All those things, all those civilian careers and military and law enforcement careers are all built into here, so you can build out your agents or your characters however you want, which is kind of interesting. And Delta Green does a really good job with, at least the
Really
current
does.
edition does a great job with that, and even the older edition, is pretty in depth as far as you're creating your character background in history.
Yeah. BRP makes it pretty easy to go that route, and then depending on which Chaosium supplements you got hooked up with, like if you had picked up a Green and Pleasant Land, for example, it introduces the idea of soldiers come home from war. So they've come back from the First World War, and what kind of training have they had? What kind of impact has this had on their sanity? That idea is presented, and so yeah. In Dark Conspiracy, there's less the sense of that overarching organization. It's more you encounter something horrible and band together with your group, but there is so much that's horrible out there.
Right.
It reduces the problem of the secrecy of it, and finding people to be participants in it. I think.
Yeah, I hesitate to talk too much about the hidden knowledge of that game, just because it's getting ready to be reintroduced either late this year or next year. It'll use the Traveler system, but it's about to get, Mongoose is going to republish it. They've got the rights. I don't know how much of the original lore they're going to keep and what they're going to change. So I hesitate to go too deeply in the GM section. With that, because I don't want to ruin it for people that might not have played it when it was originally out and might pick it up. It's an interesting game. When they come out, I'll definitely pick up Mongoose's version, and I'm curious to see what what they've done with the property.
Yeah. So I guess the only other RPG influence that I could be tempted to mention would be Shadowrun. And not because of sanity, and not because of cosmic horror or magic or any of those things, but just the idea of resistance, and the trade-off of what am I willing to give up about myself, such as to chrome myself, or I really need wired reflexes 3 to fight fight the man, and the effect that has on humanity. Right, on your essence. And I think we can see similar themes in Cyberpunk.
Right.
These really aren't the same game, or tied to the same kind of play that you get in Delta Green or any of these horror games that we've talked about, but that they are a part of the conversation of this time. I think that the zeitgeist of the time of how humane are we as people, and the longer we look into the abyss, what exactly is staring back into us,
right?
That makes these games interesting to play. But I guess to round out the conversation, we should look at some other media.
Yep. Yeah, and I made a note so I didn't forget what I was going to interrupt with earlier.
Almost like professional podcasting.
Almost. I'm a little bit rusty. Not that I was ever a professional, but it's interesting. So Stalking the Night Fantastic has a reading list in it, and talk about the 80s version had a reading list in it, and it's got a number of urban fantasy titles, a modern world with fantasy things happening, right? So we're talking about. Oh, I lost my reading list. But it had a number of different titles in there that were pretty interesting. I'll find it here in a second. I've got a PDF of the original edition, which you can buy off of Drive to RPG. But yeah, I don't know. I'll have to find it again. But the what I was going to say while I'm looking for that, what's interesting for the Stalking Night Fantastic, these books they have in here that I'm not seeing are things like Heinlein's Magic Inc. and they're kind of almost comedic urban fantasy kind of.
Well, while you're looking, one of the ones that leapt out to me was a TV show from 1978, 79, which I think is remembered now mostly as Project Blue Book. That's how I think of it. I remember it specifically being called Project Blue Book, but it was called Project UFO.
Right.
And it features investigators from the Air Force going around investigating reports, citizen reports of UFO activity or supernatural activity, and having to treat it like their mandate was to treat it as if it had happened, and finding proof for it, rather than debunking it or covering it up and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there's 2 seasons of that show, which has 2 different sets of investigators, one for each season, and weirdly with that one, the scripts were drawn from real UFO reports, and then they dressed them up and to make the episode. So
That's kind of cool.
I think that's kind of an interesting one.
So I found the reading list. This has Magic Inc., which is interesting. But things like that, but The Haunted Earth by Dean Koontz, Clifford Simak's The Goblin Reservation, and what was the other one by him on here? Out of Their Minds. But so these are urban fantasies, but all these are kind of with a touch of humor, like The Devil Will Drag You Under, by Chalker, which is a really neat book. If you can find a copy of The Devil Will Drag You Under, that's a neat. Basically, the elevator pitch for that book is, an asteroid's in a collision course with Earth. And if it destroys Earth, well, demons don't have anywhere to live. So a demon recruits some humans to help him save the Earth, which involves sending them to parallel dimensions to gather things to save the Earth. So it's kind of an interesting book.
Right.
But what I was thinking of, though, was obviously back then, we're talking older things. The Night Stalker.
Right. Kolchak.
Yeah, that definitely fits in the kind of things we're looking at. Gene Roddenberry's Spectre.
Yeah.
If you remember that?
Yeah.
That fits in there. There are a few more, but I was thinking we talked about what if your organization, you can't trust your organization, you don't trust the motives of your organization.
Right.
An excellent show to watch for that would be Millennium.
Sure.
With Lance Henderson.
It's later, but yeah, it's beautiful.
The Millennium organization in there. Yeah, again, I won't give any real details, but
and I think it's
it's
a direct inspiration of the later Delta Green for sure.
Yeah, it's well worth watching though. That's an excellent show. It's a dark show.
It's very dark,
Yeah.
and each season is very different.
Yes.
So I think you can find your flavor. If the first season is too harsh for you, you might appreciate the kind of broader approach of the second season. And if that's still too harsh for you, then you might like the more supernatural flavor of the third season.
Right. And if that's still too much, just watch the Lone Gunman series and you'll be okay. That'll be
right.
That should be light enough for you. But
the last inspiration I had comes from 1984. It's a John Carpenter film starring Jeff Bridges, which was called Starman, which again might like, why is this a reference? But the opposition, I guess, to the alien visitor of Starman,
right,
is the Department of Defense, and they have been funding SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. And so we have I guess more like an NGO in the hands of, it directly controlled by the government, going out to do things. And, with the threat of, we'll pull your funding if, this isn't handled the way that we want it, which has a kind of an interesting dynamic in the Delta Green sense about, the way that, the American government works and where the funding can come from and what kind of resources can be accessed in this kind of shadowy world that can't be made public. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting, that and its TV show version, which came out in 88, which was much more of the wandering from town to town, solving problems as you go kind of format,
right?
But from the point of view of the alien. But
and you should watch Starman anyway, because it's a great movie.
Yeah,
that's a
touching.
It's a love story. Come on,
from space with pie.
And it explains how red, yellow, and green lights work. So
exactly, putting that into the into the true view of the world. Yes. So if you want to know the mysteries of Dutch apple pie and how traffic lights really work, you need to watch John Carpenter's Starman, starring Jeff Bridges and Karen Allen.
Right.
Yes. All right. So what have we covered then in our pursuit of things that are a part of the DNA of Delta Green?
Well, I think we've established that Harrigan owes it to himself to check out Bureau 13, and now it's interesting because Delta Green 100% is its own game, and it's not just a revamp of a different game. Yes, they took ideas from different things, but they the sum is greater than its parts, which I think is something that they talk about on the second season of Go Bag.
I think so.
Yeah, as well. That because Harrigan's not thrilled with it's a very trad game in a lot of ways, but even though it's a traditional game, by bringing in a lot of these indie ideas with bonds and with some of these other concepts and whatnot, you end up with a game that has wider appeal than either those kind of either trad game or an indie game would on its own, right? So yeah.
And with the opening question that we had, like, how do you solve the problem of investigator madness, investigator death in a system like this, in an environment, like in a setting like this? We want that lethality to be present, or it gets harder and harder to reach the idea of horror, right? There has to be aspects of physical horror included, not just moral horror or outrage or the like, to have this complete package of what Delta Green represents. And so you end up having to solve this problem of where are our investigators drawn from? What is our recruiting pool? And what is an appropriate investigator for this game? It could be someone who works at the DMV, but they might have more backstory than that.
Well, if you've watched, so if you watch Tony Scott's movie Domino, if you've seen Domino, you'll know how important the DMV is as far as where to track people down and
Yeah.
databases and finding people. So there may be something to the DMV person being on your staff,
Yes.
or a minimum being a contact of somebody on your team.
Right. More likely, but what's going to drag that person out, into being an active agent is kind of the question that we might get at with Delta Green. And so I think encountering that problem, it shows that play has been happening. They've been playing. They've been encountering not the weakness or the problem of the system that they're using. They've been encountering the effect of the system that they're using, right? And so they've answered some of those questions that are raised by effects that don't match what they're going for, right? So we want to have things like wounds be dangerous. We're going to include this lethality mechanism so that, when you're using automatic weapons, as you will in a modern setting in this kind of situation, we can spend less time on it than we would otherwise. And so that we don't have to step too far away from that in-character perspective where we might feel some empathy with what the character's going through and get some of the vicarious thrill of that danger or of that horror and that kind of stuff. So how can we do this? And then how can we drive it home? Bonds and the types of sanity effect and the deadening of the human spirit and all that fun stuff. That's so much fun to play. Anyway, thanks for taking time out of your very busy schedule to chat with me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I had a great time.
And hopefully our conversation contributes something to the appreciation of games like Delta Green and those which came before.
Yeah. And again, if you haven't checked out the Go Bag podcast, go check that out.
Links will be in the show notes. All right. Take care.
Yep. Thank you.
You have been listening to an episode of the Casting Shadows podcast, an extension of the Casting Shadows blog and the Runeslinger YouTube channel. If you have any thoughts to share or comments to make about this episode, any previous episode, or any episode to come, well, you can leave us a voice message via SpeakPipe at speakpipe.com/castingshadows-podcast. There are other ways to get in touch with us, and you can find them in the show notes.